My brain is so flabbergasted by the temperature difference that I'm experiencing right now, because somebody said to me it's 38 degrees today, and this picture was taken last week, one of my stupid hobbies, at minus 21 degrees. So I'm experiencing almost a temperature difference of 60 degrees, and I think that's just absolutely awesome. But okay, no, so as Ben said, I come from particle physics, and particle physics was when I started doing machine learning, because machine learning is kind of a very natural extension of a field in which you do a lot of data analysis, and that can't be good. Oh, that was the power break. Not yet. Okay, because there's going to be a power break, and we're very excited to experience it. No, that wasn't it. That was such a glitch. Yeah, it's very exotic to me, your power breaks. All right, no, okay, so I come from machine learning. Machine learning was where I learned to do, particle physics, that's where I learned to do machine learning. And basically, the first time that I really fell in love with machine learning was when I basically convinced two of my friends, another PhD candidate and a postdoc, to try and improve one of the analyses that we were working on regardless with traditional statistical methods and use machine learning to solve the problem instead. And what we found out in what has now become a publication, and I'm so proud of it because there is not a single professor on that publication. What we found out was that we could actually use machine learning to improve detectability of a particle that we haven't found yet. And we were like, oh my God, should we send this to Nature? Nature didn't want it, we didn't send it to Nature. We sent it to a normal physics journal, and they were like, yeah, awesome, artificial intelligence. But what is it that you've actually found out about these particles? And we were like, it's easier to find them, isn't that enough? And then, of course, this wasn't exactly how the dialogue went, but the first referee actually, and the first point that he made was he said that, well, a 25-30% improvement in detectability is, of course, good news for us. But you don't say anything about kind of where this increased accuracy or detectability comes from at all. And we were all like, that's a good point. And none of the Coursera machine learning courses said anything about that. It just said it just click .fit, .predict, and there you go. So I felt a bit like I was having a moment with the universe and with my computer. I was like, thank you so much, computer, for making these plots where I can distinguish particles. But what is it, dear computer, that you have understood about the universe and particle physics? And of course, machine learning models aren't created to explain the world to us, right? They're created to have high accuracy and high predictability, being able to predict what we want them to predict. And now, this is kind of where the black box problem or the explanation problem comes in, really, for people doing science with machine learning. It's not that there is a ghost inside the computer or that the computer suddenly keeps secrets from us. No, it is that now we make models that we can stare at and we can run them and we can print them, but they don't really teach us anything about what they have understood about the data. And now at this time, when I was staring at my computer going, why? This was in 2017, 2018, and coincidentally, not because of me, but coincidentally, that was also when, if you look at Google Scholar, so this is from a Google Scholar search that I did last week, people started writing about and trying to publish about explainable artificial intelligence and interpretable artificial intelligence. And now you see that the field has become so ridiculously huge. I don't know if you can see the last, can you see the whole screen? Yeah, the field has come so ridiculously huge that it just swamps the rest of the numbers. So I made a logarithmic axis for you. You're welcome. And you can see that there has been some interest around explaining artificial intelligence or machine learning models for a long time. But since you can say 2014, 15, 16, there has been literally an exponential increase in the interest of how can we explain our models to ourselves, to each others, and to other people who are interested in using them. So that is why I want to tell you about I really want to try and tell you about all aspects of this wonderful, chaotic nightmare of a field that is explainable AI. And so when I sat down and started making my slides, I was like, I think most people are going to have a technical background. So now I just want to check if my assumption was correct. How many of you have a technical background? How many of you do not have a technical background? No shame in that. Okay, so the vast majority have a technical background. Okay, so what I did then was I lure you into this. I'm going to talk about a lot of methods from the field, but I've wrapped that up in like legal aspects, ethical aspects, more kind of the soft aspects. So all of you will have to endure everything, okay? So I'll start by basically discussing some motivation for explaining our models at all, because it's not even obvious to everybody that we need to explain our models. I want to tell you about the legal aspects, although that is a bit of a challenging topic, and I'm very open to discuss this with you also afterwards or later in the week if you want. Then I'm going to tell you about the most popular methods in the field, the one that you're most likely to encounter if you go out there and stumble across some wild AI in nature, and also some of the topic or some of the methods that I just think are coolest. And then if we have time, if I talk fast enough, which I'll try not to do, we'll have time for some perspectives and discussions afterwards. And I really hope that you guys also want to kind of reflect critically around the things that I say. I'm going to try to have time for questions like all the time. And I really value your perspectives also if you have cybernetics. And none of them really liked the field or the name, but it sort of got stuck. And that's why we call it AI today. But anyway, yeah, so artificial intelligence, right? It's what we do when we try to make machines intelligent. And there are a myriad of different methods and approaches to how we can make our computers solve problems in an intelligent way. And we can really roughly divide all the methods into two categories. Is that nice and overseeable? So in the one camp, we have symbolic AI, so symbolic approaches to making computers intelligent, right? That's when we tell our computers exactly what we want them to do, which rules we want them to follow. And that camp of AI has been immensely successful. Like every time you take an airplane, you really trust symbolic AI methods. And the nice thing about symbolic AI is that when we tell computers exactly what we want them to do, then we do that using symbols that bear meaning to us. So our computers end up also using those symbols and kind of communicating to us through those symbols. So we can look, when we look at symbolic AI systems, we can look directly at them and go, this here is kind of the meaning that the computer has understood, which is marvelous, right? Now the problem is that symbolic AI methods don't really handle all the uncertainties of the real world that well. So we kind of hit a bit of a wall there. So we figured we want to use statistical methods. We want our machines to be able to learn from data to themselves kind of find out how they should solve problems in the real world with all its mess and fuzziness. And that is working spectacularly well. But the problem now arises, and the reason that we call these methods sub-symbolic is that the meaning that the computer manages to pull out of the data is not represented using symbols that we humans can understand meaning from, right? So it's represented in terms of symbols such as 0.3 times some activation of something plus, it's basically arithmetics that we humans understand, but we do not understand which meaning those symbols represent. It's like the meaning is underneath the symbols, right? That's why we can call it sub-symbolic. And that is really where kind of all this mysticism comes from. So very often we call machine learning models black boxes, and the business leaders hear that, oh no, this algorithm is a black box and stuff. But it really boils down to that we can't stare at a machine learning model and see which rules it is using, and that's all it is. That is the whole problem. That is the whole problem of the black box, so to speak. Now, sub-symbolic methods are definitely working spectacularly well for us, right? AlphaZero is beating us in all our games. AlphaFold, I think that AlphaFold, most of you have probably heard of AlphaFold, right? How many of you have heard about it? Okay, awesome. AlphaFold to me it's just my favorite example of machine of machine learning methods solving something for us at all, because that really shows that a neural network can solve a scientific problem that we humans have been banging at around for 15 years, and we just can't find it out at all. We can't solve it. And then a neural network with sufficient data and capacity kind of comes along and solves it for us. And while it is immensely useful and it's given us this huge database over all the protein structures known to humankind, it still hasn't taught us anything about microbiology. Right? So I say with AlphaFold, we're in exactly the same position as I was with my particles, 7 years ago or whatever, that are like, okay, nice, the model has understood something, but it can't teach me what it has understood. We also know that neural networks are universal function approximators, which when you hear about it for the first time sounds absolutely marvelous. A neural network can approximate absolutely any function, any functional relationship between data and the answer to the problem that you're trying to solve, provided, of course, that there is a relationship between the two. That is immensely powerful, and just like having such a tool available is, I think, is just mind-blowing. However, we do not really understand deeply what that ability comes from. Like, why do neural networks generalize when they have the capacity to just overfit and just learn the data by heart? Why do they do that, and when do they do that? We actually do not know. So we're kind of wielding these immensely powerful tools, and we don't really deeply understand where they get their capabilities from. Now, I'm, of course, not the only one saying this, so I don't know if you have any of you seen the talk by Ali Rahimi when he won the Test of Time Award at NeurIPS in 2017, where he said machine learning has become alchemy. It's literally become known as the machine learning has become alchemy talk. How many of you have seen it? Not many. So that's a bit of a gap in like your AI cultural background. I really encourage you to go and watch the talk. It's definitely very kind of engaging, and he got like a 40-second ovation after giving it. And what he basically said, right, was that we're building systems that govern healthcare and mediate our civic dialogue. We could influence elections. I would like to live in a society whose systems are built on top of verifiable, rigorous, thorough knowledge and not alchemy, right? So I mean, this man is very competent. He knows a lot about neural networks and machine learning. So he doesn't say this because he just kind of hasn't thought about it hard enough. He said this because he said that we have these really powerful systems and we're letting them make decisions for us, but we don't like really understand deeply what they're all about. Now that does not represent kind of the only take or opinion out there. Most of you have probably heard of Jan de Kuhn, right? One of the guys that we can thank backpropagation for. He said that he enjoyed the talk and he found it very engaging, but he was also a bit offended by it. He said the main message was, in essence, current practice in machine learning is akin to alchemy. It's insulting, yes, but never mind that, it's wrong. He says that engineering progress has almost always been made before theory. Theoretical understanding has come, right? So we kind of, humans have used tools for a long time that we don't understand, and then afterwards we've kind of come along with theoretical knowledge. Now I, of course, disagree with that again. I say first we have a theory and then we go and test it and build machines. But never mind that. The point is that I want you guys to know that there is not a consensus in the field right now that we even need to explain our models at all among researchers, okay? So and there are brilliant minds on both sides. I have a clear stance, which is, yeah, I think this is worthwhile doing, but that is a personal opinion, kind of, when it comes to research. But there are loads more perspectives here. So one question is, of course, do we have to explain our machine learning models? And the answer is that legally, this isn't clear at all. So what do you guys think? Is there a regulation out there in the world that applies to all AI systems? Do we have, like, among all the regulations that we have in the whole world, do we have an AI law? What do you think? Yes? Some people go like, maybe. Yeah, no, the answer is actually no. We don't have like an AI law. That, of course, does not mean that you can do whatever you want with AI or machine learning, right? The regulations in the areas where you go and apply it, of course, still apply. But most people, when they have a machine learning model and are kind of afraid of regulations, that is because they want to use that model on data that describes humans, so data that is privacy protected. And there are now an increasing amount of regulations in the world that are written to protect our privacy, and many of those allude to kind of some kind of requirement for explanations. So in the course of a half-long career in XAI, I've managed to gain this overview of privacy protection regulations that give humans a right to an explanation. So these are the ones that definitely mention or allude to a requirement for explanations in some form. And the interesting thing is that these exist all over the world, right? There's a GDPR in Europe, which I think was a bit of a trendsetter. There are some states in the US that are trying to write these, or are in the process right now of writing these regulations. I was surprised to see how many African data protection laws there are. Now, the problem with all these is that they talk about, like, yeah, you should try to explain your models, but they are very, very unspecific. They use words like transparency and explainability and don't really clarify what they mean about it. So just to zoom in and give you an example. So the Protection of Personal Information Act that you have here in South Africa says that it requires a responsible party to provide a data subject with sufficient information about the underlying logic of the automated processing of the information relating to him or her. Like, that is the explanation requirement that if you're gonna use machine learning on privacy-protected data here. Now, what does that mean? Like, what does that tell you? What do you have to go and implement? No idea, right? And the GDPR that we have in Europe that I have to think about is almost even worse, right? So at one point it says that I have to give end users meaningful information about the logic of processing, or later it says, and this later part is actually supposed to be a clarification of the former part, it says an explanation of the decision reached after algorithmic assessment. Like, that does unfortunately not tell me when I want to develop models what I have to do. The interesting thing is that in the law literature, people have tried to clarify this, what it means. So then we see publications such as The Right to Explanation Explained come up, and really experienced legislators try to explain to us kind of what the GDPR or what POPIA also requires of us. But the truth is that they kind of don't know either. So like, nobody really knows what we should do when we try to explain machine learning models, and that is a real headache. So now if you're like on your master's or on your PhD and thinking like, why is this Norwegian lady going on about this? The reason that this Norwegian lady is going on about this is that this is a huge roadblock for very many companies, huge companies and startups, like the whole scale, when they want to start using machine learning models that they develop with good intentions. So that there is this wishy-washy, fuzzy requirement out there for an explanation, and nobody really knows what it means. So to make things even more exciting, I can tell you that there is somebody out there trying to write down this thing that I asked you about earlier, a specific regulation for AI. That is, of course, again, the EU. So in the EU, there are really experienced legislators sitting right now thinking, okay, so this AI thing, we need to really regulate it specifically. And this is a law that hasn't been implemented yet, but the draft is out there and you can actually go and read it. And most people think that it will be implemented within a year or two. So it hasn't come into effect. And of course, you don't have an equivalent here in South Africa yet. But based on how the GDPR has inspired or led the way for legislators all around the world, I think we can safely assume that if this thing called the AI Act is implemented in Europe, that it will only be a question of time, right, before Africa and also the US, I think, and most people think, will kind of follow in their steps. So if you worry about AI legislation or regulation at all, then I recommend you go and at least have a look at the AI Act. And if you don't want to go have a look at it, that's fine, because I'm going to explain to you right now what it really boils down to. So it's an interesting approach that they take, because the legislators in the EU have understood that it doesn't make sense to regulate like neural networks and XGBoost and sklearn or something like that. They say we're going to regulate AI systems based on which risk is involved with using them. And they span the whole scale. They say that we're going to regulate this from no-risk system, such as movie recommendation in Netflix or whatever, to unacceptable risk systems. And unacceptable risk systems are going to be prohibited. Unacceptable risk, they say, is, for instance, associated with social credit scoring, such as they're doing in China. That is the example the EU uses. And they say, that's just going to be forbidden. You can't do that in Europe. Go away. An interesting thing is they also say that you're not allowed to use systems that manipulate users or exploit people's vulnerabilities to make them addicted or to influence their behavior, which means that Instagram and TikTok are going to be forbidden in Europe in 2 years. So it's going to be interesting to see there what happens. But the interesting part for our purposes now is kind of what happens in the middle of the scale. The EU says that there are going to be some high-risk AI systems. For instance, all AI systems doing credit scoring or applied in hospitals, and those will be regulated, and there will be a requirement there for explanations. Right? So any machine learning model that is going to be implemented in a hospital will have to be delivered along with explanations. And I think now that the legislators have seen that the requirement for an explanation that we have inside the GDPR isn't sufficiently concrete, and I hope and think that they're going to concretize that more in this new AI Act. But that remains to be seen. So, okay, who cares about model explanations? To get back to our little explanations, I would say lawyers and legal people, I don't know if they care quite yet, but they're definitely going to care, sooner or later, and we'll just have to wait and see when they start actually really caring. The category here that I would say we can be most sure are going to care about explanations are CEOs, investors, stakeholders, because coincidentally, the year that I worked at PwC, yes, because I've done that as well, the PwC had this CEO survey that they publish each year or each 2 years or whatever, and there the topic of the CEO survey was AI, and they asked CEOs a lot of questions. Among those was, does an AI system have to be explainable in order for you to trust it? And almost all CEOs were like, yeah, of course, totally. Now, a challenge there is that I suspect that if you ask a CEO what they mean by explainable, they're going to be just as specific as those legislations that I was hating on before. So I unfortunately don't think that this is useful, but at least it is an opinion that we can count with. Now, the end user perspective, that is interesting, because there are really no surveys out there asking people whether they want machine learning models or AI systems explained to them. But I think that the answer to that question would regardless be no, unless the system does something that I don't like. Right? That is when people start caring. We don't really care about how stuff works until it annoys us, right? And the classic example is, of course, that you go to your bank, apply for a loan, ask, can I please get a loan? And the bank says, no, because computer said no, right? Then you and any end user would say, I want an explanation of why this happened. And the content of that explanation, we understand, would have to put the end user in a position so that they can change the outcome, right? So in that sense, I think that the explanations that end users would want from AI systems is something that protects their autonomy, right? That makes them capable of influencing what happens to them and having control of their own situation. So developers, how many of you work as developers? Some 5–10%? All right, please come and talk to me afterwards and tell me whether you care about explainability. Because among my friends that are developers, there's really a 50-50 divide. Some people just like love stacking layers and just have fun with that, and if they have a high accuracy, you know, it's party time, and then they don't care. While others are really like, no, but I want to know exactly what my system has understood. And that's fine. And among researchers, then you have the one side, people that are passionate about explainability, such as myself, but you really have the whole scale over to also like more the Jan LeCun attitude or Cassie at Google, who say that explainability really doesn't matter or even also is unrealistic. Right, so the view there that also Cassie fronts in this really good Medium article, she says that if you're wondering whether a person or a student has understood something and can do a job, you're not going to crack their brain open and start like messing around in it. You're just going to test them, right? You're going to rely on testing, exams, and experience. And if they perform well, you're just going to trust that they'll continue performing well. Now, Cassie is definitely smarter than I am, but I think she's absolutely wrong. And I think that that kind of take that you can test your way to robustness and trustworthiness is wrong. And the reason for that is that when you test a machine learning system, what you find out is what its performance is on exactly the data that you decided to test on, or data drawn from exactly the same distribution. Once you go outside that distribution, you do not know, you can't extrapolate how the system is going to behave, because we humans just don't have any intuition for discontinuous functions in high-dimensional spaces, right? We just don't. Also, of course, you can't test your way to knowing exactly what a model bases its decisions or its predictions upon. And I think that a brilliant illustration of this, you can't test your way to robustness, is by these real-life adversarial examples that I'm sure you've seen before. My favorite of these is a publication from 2018, where a group of researchers basically took a road sign recognition model that was functioning spectacularly well, and found out that you can actually confuse it by taking a stop sign, putting like these well-placed black and white stickers on it, and it's going to think that it's instead now looking at a speed limit sign. Now this would of course be very dangerous if it happened in the real world, right? Somebody sprays some graffiti on a stop sign and suddenly the car goes like, woo, 45 miles per hour. But that's not really the point, right? The point is that although this could be easily fixed, you would never think about testing for exactly this scenario, right? You would miss this during testing, right? And this all boils down to the curse of dimensionality. There is absolutely no way for us to test every situation that we could end up in when we have data with, you know, hundreds and thousands of features. We just can't, like the sun would burn out before we would have time to do that. So I'd say we cannot test our way to robustness, and especially for safety critical systems, we really don't want to rely on that. We just have not been unlucky and have tested all the scenarios we should have thought of. Interestingly enough, how many of you have heard of Smale's 18 problems? It's a list of mathematical problems like set forth for the 21st century. And one of the questions is like, does P equal NP? Like really difficult problems like this. And the last question, you can't see it there, is what are the limits of intelligence? And some researchers have suggested that this instability and this kind of thing that we cannot test our way to find out whether neural networks or machine learning models are robust is actually the answer to Smale's 18th problem. Like there we have it. Because these authors here, you should check out the publication afterwards by Alex Hansen and co-authors. They prove the theorem saying that any training procedure based on training ReLUs of the activation neural networks for many simple classification problems with fixed architecture will yield networks that are either inaccurate or unstable if accurate. So they say that given a loss function, given training data, there is an uncountable number of neural networks that can solve that problem with a high accuracy, and only one of them is going to be stable. Only a few of them are going to be stable, and there is no way of knowing whether you've made the stable one. Okay? So we cannot, provably, as they prove, we cannot find out that we have found, the golden one, the one we're looking for. And this, of course, some people go like, yeah, Inga, I hear what you're saying, but AlphaFold works spectacularly well, right? Yes, it does, but like sooner or later, like sometime before the universe dies of the heat death, there is going to be one problem where even AlphaFold goes wrong, and we don't know exactly which problem that's going to be. It may not be a huge issue, or it could be a huge issue. And I would say that it's going to be a huge issue every time we use machine learning in safety-critical system, or we try to use machine learning to approach true autonomy, right? When we put our machine learning models out there to function on their own in the real world, and we cannot know exactly, when that one data point is going to come, where they just do something that is absolutely ludicrous and where a human wouldn't go wrong at all. And it's really interesting to see that legislators are starting to realize that, and are saying also that robustness and explainability of AI systems has emerged as key elements for future legislation. And it's going to be so interesting for us, researchers and developers of AI systems, to see where we're going to go with this. Yes, question. Do we have a microphone, or? Yeah.
Here's the question. Thank you. Yeah, interesting talk. Just short comment. Can't you say the same for humans? I mean, you can't know which human will evidently end up doing some really weird things or not understand this or that, or behave in a way you as a government did not intend.
Yeah.
So my question is like, is that the
like how can
is that the criteria we judge our technical development on?
Yeah, it's a good question, slightly leading question. So I won't spend too much time answering it. I'm just going to give you my thoughts. Maybe we could address it in the ethics panel, like if the other panelists have a view on that. But I would want to say two things. So one is that when we rely on humans and then they may go out and do something like very unexpected, then that is more like a moral, social, ethical kind of what kind of behavior can we expect a person, or why could we expect somebody to just change their behavior? It's not because humans are, interpolations in high-dimensional spaces where most of the space is empty of data. Right, so for humans, I would say we can talk more about intentions, while for machine learning models, it's more about which function have I really found here. So I would say they're fundamentally two different questions. And also, even disregarding that, I would say we can say that, okay, so humans are this free agents, and human free will is an end in itself, while machines are these things that we build, and we can actually say that this is actually are the requirements that we have for machines, and they're stricter than the requirements we have for humans. Right, so we could have like an asymmetry between the restriction or the requirements we have to humans and machines, and that would still be morally valid. Okay, we can keep discussing that later. Thank you very much for the question. I like it. All right, so even though we do not know where legislators are going to end up and whether they're going to land on saying that all of you will have to explain all your AI models or they will be prohibited, there are other motivations for explaining our models, right? The AlphaFold, or my old particle physics example, is we could actually use machine learning to solve new scientific problems, and then if we could explain the models, we could actually do knowledge discovery. We could find out what scientific knowledge the models have that we don't have. Some systems are starting to work so well that they don't need any humans in the loop at all. If these systems, start making decisions we don't really understand and then feed into each other, then accountability and human autonomy could evaporate a bit in the process, and that of course stresses me. And then, of course, also, if we want to preserve human control and oversight, then we basically need to understand the decisions of the system, making decisions on our behalf, right? So what I think is going to happen to the field of XAI, which is, by the way, a complete mess, is that it's going to divide a bit into two subcategories, because if you want to explain machine learning model or any computer program to a human, right? Then what you have to do is that you have to get out the essence, the information content inside that program or model. That's one step. And then you have to communicate in such a way that it makes sense to the human recipient or the end user, which could be, in any weird situation in life. So there are two steps there, really. And I think that now, as the field of XAI matures, we're going to see two subfields kind of emerge more and more clearly there. Unfortunately, if you look into publications, also really good publications about explainable AI, you're going to notice that most of them are really inconsistent with the words they use, the terminology. So some use words like explainability and interpretability and transparency and explicability, I've also seen, like really interchangeably. And some define what they mean by their words and some don't. And it's really, it can become a bit frustrating. I kind of will admit that, to read XAI publications. And of course, people have tried to settle on the one system or terminology of classification of methods to rule them all or something. Unfortunately, there are a gazillion taxonomies even out there trying to categorize this field. And some try to categorize it based on, when is the explanation produced? Is it when the model is trained, or is it when the model is used, or is it afterwards? For whom is the explanation intended? How is the explanation produced? And really the shortcoming of all of these categorizations is that you're going to find methods that fit into several categories, and then people don't like the categorization, and then they go and try to make their own. So if you check now for how many papers on XAI taxonomy, so not just XAI, but how many papers are trying to give you an overview of the field, you're going to find, I can't see the slide, you can see it either. Anyway, you just have to believe me. You're going to find 7,000 publications right now just trying to give you an overview of the field. The one on the top there by Adebayo et al. Is actually really good. But for the rest of them, I would just say that if you want to get into XAI and contribute to the field, and perhaps even have a supervisor who suggests it, then by all means do not start by writing a taxonomy or a survey. Very many people start their career in XAI trying to get an overview, writing a survey. Please don't do that. No. Instead, describe a need for an explanation with methods that you can, or other researchers can use to find out whether they've met your needs, or propose a new XAI method and test it on, or benchmark it on publicly available data. Please do one of those two things if you want to work in XAI. Don't write the next survey to rule them all. It's not going to work. All right, so I'm just going to try to give you enough terminology here now to follow the rest of my talk today and the talk tomorrow. I'm not going to try to impose anything else on you because I don't want to be the nth person to, make the framework to rule them all. So when I say interpretable or interpretability, then I mean a passive characteristic of a model. That means a system that is interpretable and can stare at and understand what it's about. I can use my human brain to interpret what's going on and see the meaning in it, like I can do with a decision tree. In decision tree, I can go like, oh yeah, that node splits the data based on this and that, and my brain gets it, okay? That is interpreting a system. Explainability is something else. Explainability is an active characteristic of a model, of a system. So it's an interface between the model and myself that is built with the purpose of explaining the model to me, okay? So that's a little difference there. Interpretability, passive, you stare at it. Explainability, there is something there that explains the system to me. So just like the field of AI is a collection of methods that we've developed to try and make computers perform intelligently, explainable AI is basically a set of tools, frameworks, a collection of methods that we have made to try to explain machine learning models to us humans. Okay, so one way to mentally organize this, which is my personal way, is that you have a machine learning model with some data that comes in, X. What it tries to do, the model is approximate some function f, and that's parameterized by a bunch of parameters, theta. So basically, we have three things here to look closer at, three things to inspect. It's f itself. We could say that, if only f were so that I could look at it and immediately interpret it and understand it myself. So what we can do then, in order to try and explain the full model, is that we can replace it by a locally interpretable function. So right around the area of my interest, I can train a surrogate model to replace the full model and see if they behave the same, then I can just stare at the simplified model and I can understand something about the full model. And that's my explanation. We can also say, okay, so what I have access to here are the inputs that go into the model and the outputs. What if I perturb the inputs and based on that, and look at what happens to the outputs, and based on that, I can say something about how this whole model or this black box here behaves. So I can do that, and then I can make a kind of a sensitivity analysis and say, now I've explained the model in the sense that I've explained the behavior of the model. Okay? Or the last option, I can investigate the parameters, kind of a look inside the box, right? Based on the parameter values here and how they value under different circumstances, I can produce an explanation for the full model. Again, these are kind of the three approaches that I can have, and I would say also is the same way we would behave if a magic box that could solve all our problems suddenly fell down from the sky, right? We could say, does this box look like anything else I know? We could shake the box and poke it from all sides, like a physicist would do, and try to learn something about it like that. Or we could get really impatient and smash it with a hammer and look what's inside, right? Those are the three things that we can do with the box. And that's the categorization that I'm going to use now, as I want to tell you about the most popular and widely used methods from all the categories. So first, let's look at surrogate model explanations. We're going to do that now for the last 12 minutes. And the next two times, we're going to look at the two other categories and methods from the two other categories to explain machine learning models. All right, so how many of you would say to me as an old physicist, if I want to do experiments, physical experiments inside this room, how many of you would say that I could safely assume that the floor is flat? Yes? No? Didn't understand the question? Fell asleep? Anyone? No? Okay. Now, I can tell you as a physicist, if I perform experiments here, I can safely say that the floor is flat, and that is going to be a good model of the floor. Although I know that, of course, the whole globe, the whole Earth, is not flat. I promise we know that. Still, the floor being flat is a perfectly valid model. I can do good experiments and get good results based on a locally flat model. This is actually exactly the thing that is, what's the word? Can't come up with the word. Anyway, that is exactly the thing that Taylor expansions rely on, right? You can write any function or approximate any function as a series around a point by calculating first the first derivative, then the second derivative, and so on and so on. And the farther you get out in the series, the less important the terms are going to be. The first order term is really the most important one. And we kind of, if we wanted to make surrogate models to explain full machine learning models, we wish that we could write Taylor expansions for it, because then we would have like a linear term as the first term, and the linear terms are really interpretable, right? But in order to do that, what we would have to do is that we would have to differentiate our machine learning model, F, and unfortunately we can't do that. But we can do the next best thing to differentiating it. We can define one point, x0, that we're interested in, and then we can define a neighborhood around that point, and then we can see around, in this neighborhood, I'm going to treat the model as kind of locally flat, and I'm going to approximate the derivative. So what I can do then, say I have a full model, that's the rainbowy thing. I know that it doesn't look bad, but I needed to be able to plot it. But just imagine that this full model F with the rainbow colors is like this nightmare of a function that we cannot even picture. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to decide on a point, x0. This is the instance that I want to explain my model around. Then I generate endpoints, xai, and I'm going to use these to fit an interpretable model. I'm going to call that G. Okay, so what I have then is basically I have a data set, and I have to, for each feature describing my data instances, I have to generate new values, okay? And new points with feature values inside them. So when I fit my simplified local model G, does any of you have a suggestion of what I should use as targets if I want G to behave as f locally? Any takers? I have a full model f, I decide on a neighborhood, and then I want G to behave like f in this neighborhood. What should be the targets? Thank you very much. My best friend right now, yes. The predictions, of course, of f in each of those points, because the point of G, right, is to approximate f. So what I have to do then first is I have to minimize a loss that is such that G behaves as closely as f, as closely to f as possible in my little neighborhood, pi x. But at the same time, I have one more constraint, right? At the same time, I don't want G to just become as complicated as f, right? Because then I'll just have made a new fat problem for myself. So while I minimize this discrepancy between f and g, or the loss between f and g, I need to stick to a g that is interpretable, meaning that I want it to have a low complexity omega. All right? So if I manage to do those two things, what I'm actually doing is that I'm minimizing this joint objective there. So I choose g, small g, from a class of interpretable models, call it capital G, such that G behaves as f and still remains interpretable. And what I've done then, I mean, and this isn't even that complicated, right? But what I've done then is actually I have solved the objective function inside, I would say, the ultimate XAI classics of them all, called LIME. So LIME is a method that was published in 2017, and I think if you stumble across an XAI method out there in the wild, chances are it's going to be an explanation generated by LIME. So LIME stands for Local Interpretable Model Agnostic Explanation, and the thing with local is that the explanation is generated in a neighborhood, right, by fitting a model in that neighborhood that is such that you can look at the model, G, and just immediately understand what's going on. Okay, so that is, to just really quickly wrap up what LIME does. You have a full model, F, machine learning model. Don't understand it. Nobody understands it. Your boss doesn't understand it. And you want to explain one instance, why it behaved the way that it did at that instance. So what you do then is you generate a bunch of random points around in the neighborhood around the point that you want to explain. You use it to predict targets for those points. You fit an interpretable model to it. And then you have, and the interpretable model can be something like logistic regression, a decision tree, something you can stare at and just immediately understand, and then you use that model for explanations. And there you go, boom, generated your first explanation. Wasn't that hard? Now, one challenge about LIME that I've met, because I worked in engineering cybernetics for a while, and we made a lot of robotics applications such as autonomous surface vehicles, which is a brainy way of saying boat, that made a couple of decisions per second. And every decision then was a new point that we would want to explain. And of course, we didn't have time to fit in, to sample a bunch of points, use the full model to predict, and then fit a new local interpretable model for every decision that was made, right? What we actually wanted was explanations to be generated just as fast as the full model predicted, because the full model was steering the vehicle. So then I have another recommendation for you, which is making this thing called linear model trees. How many of you have heard of linear model trees? They're absolutely marvelous, cute little animals. So they're just like normal decision trees, but in the leaf nodes, they have linear functions. Or if you want to go completely crazy, they can also have polynomials out there. So basically what they do is they make piecewise linear functions. They're very, very quick to evaluate, because it's basically just a decision tree telling you which linear function to use. And also, what you can do is that you can take, for instance, an agent, so a reinforcement learning agent in my case, or any complex model. You can build the whole linear model tree for the whole for the whole space that you want to use the model on, and then you can use it to generate explanations on the fly. And I would say that if you like Lime and kind of buy the story behind Lime, you should also buy the story behind linear model trees, and you can actually use them on the fly. So next time you're in a situation where you need to explain an agent running in real time, I recommend you entertain the idea of using linear model trees. So finally, just since I have time for it, a quick word about, because decision trees are very often used as interpretable models because we humans can look at decision trees, right, and they immediately make sense to us. A complicating factor there is, though, that the human brain, as amazing as it is, still has limited capacity, right? So if I give you a decision tree with, 1,000 nodes, you won't be able to take it all in at the same time, right? So there is some additional terminology here. I promised I wouldn't give you more terminology, but I do. Introduced in 2018, suggesting that when we talk about model interpretability, we need more words than just interpretable, right? So what he suggested then was that we can talk about things being simulatable, transparent, or interpretable, meaning that your brain can interpret or can simulate the whole system all at once, right? That is the most transparent or interpretable a system can be. Next comes decomposable, interpretable, or transparent. That means that you can look at several parts of the system. You can understand or interpret every part of it, but putting it all together is just like too much for your brain. And decision trees can fall into both those categories, depending on how large they are, right? Small trees are simulatable, transparent, while large trees are only decomposable, transparent. Then the final one would be algorithmic, interpretable, or transparent, which means that the model that is this transforms the data throughout so that your brain kind of can't keep track, but your computer can keep track. All right, so to summarize in a minute and a half, Somebody's done this before. No. Symbolic machine learning methods or symbolic AI methods such as neural networks work absolutely spectacularly well. Some of us want to explain them, we want to know what they're about. There is a wide range of motivations for wanting that, and some people don't want it, and that's fine, we still love those people. I would say there are three ways we can go about, there are three categories that we can put our explanation methods into, and we've looked at the first of those methods, the surrogate model approach, where we just replace the difficult beast, the neural network, by something that we can interpret. And the other two classes of methods are way more interesting, and we're going to look at them tomorrow. All right. Thanks for listening, and see you tomorrow. We can take questions, but it's a long day for you guys.
Yeah. Any questions? Yes. Okay.
Well, really interesting talk. And my question was that in the optimization problem where you include a loss and then you want to minimize the complexity of the function you want to interpret, how do you mathematically implement that? Or like, I guess that there's a lot of functions you can put in there. How do you measure this complexity?
Yeah, exactly. So this optimization problem can quickly turn non-convex, unfortunately, and you will have to define both the loss and the complexity. So, and how you define specifically the complexity will depend on the capital G, that class of models that you select your interpretable model from, right? So if it's a linear model, it can be the number of coefficients, right? Or the difference in size of the coefficients. If it's a decision tree, then it can be the number of splits or the depth, right? So it really depends on, the class capital G that you select from.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, thank you for a great talk. Just short, allow me to ponder about this, because you mentioned on your prior slide that some of you in Explainable AI would like to work on this, and some people don't, and you made a funny remark about that. Now, I love Explainable AI and what you guys are doing, but I also don't see the dichotomy between people that do Explainable AI and people that don't. So just for clarification, do you see that, or is that like, are we necessarily working, like, can't we just push the envelope for technology development as well as pushing the understanding?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And yeah, and if it came across like these two camps are at war, then that was not my intention at all. Of course, some people can just go like, I want to develop spectacular methods and don't think about XAI, while other people go, I want to work on XAI. That's fine. So I was just trying to kind of tell you that within AI research, there is not a consensus, right, regarding whether explainability is necessary. Some people say, like, it's not necessary, we can push on. While some people say, no, slow down, we need to explain, right, before we push on.
Short follow-up, because the AC is not working, and I'm sure everyone is, yeah, now I lost it. But thank you so much for the conversation.
Yeah, later.
Well, you can catch Inga during tea time. Any more questions? Okay. Oh. All right.
Yeah, the AC isn't working, is it? No. Oh, of course. The power thing. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. My question is, I guess you touched upon it a little bit with the boat, but what are your kind of outstanding success stories for Explainable AI? Could be a bank that then hands their customers Shapley values after, they've been rejected for a loan, and the customers are happier than without the Shapley values, or yeah, I guess what's your biggest success story?
Like that I contributed to?
No,
or that
just
I
that you
of?
know of, that you know of.
No, I don't think there are huge success stories yet. And I'm going to discuss it more tomorrow. But a huge problem is just that we haven't agreed on what we want from explanations. Like, what is a good information content to an explanation? So I'm sure that it has happened out there that somebody had somebody was unhappy with the prediction of a machine learning model, and then the developer said, it's because of this and that, and then they changed this and that, and then they got the prediction they wanted. But that's not really heartwarming, right? It's more like the way technology should be. Right? So I would say like the real success story, I think that like of my dreams would be that somebody explains AlphaFold and we learn some like new, I don't know, like law of nature or something new about microbiology. I mean, that would be heartwarming, right? Fortunately, no good stories today.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. I was wondering about Lime. I feel like the same way you can make a neural network tell you anything about like a problem using adversarial attack, here you could, by just changing the neighboring zone on which you're gonna do the imputation, basically, you could make any kind of interpretation that you want. So how do you choose this neighboring zone on which you calculate the evaluation?
Yes, very good research question right there. So what was the first thing I was going to say? Well, you can't make like literally anything happen, right? Because you're still going to use the full model to predict, right? So the question then is, of course, just like with the example that I said, I can pretend that, or I can say that the floor here is flat, and I'm going to be right? But I can't do that if my neighborhood is going to be from here to Antarctica. Then it's not true anymore that it's flat. So I have to choose the appropriate neighborhood, and that is going to be a question that has different answers for different full models, unfortunately, right? So what I didn't mention while I was talking about Lime is that you would usually go and sample, where's my pointer? There. You would usually go and sample a quite large neighborhood, but then you would weigh the points so that the points that are closest to your original instance have a higher weight than the ones that are further apart. And then the question is, which weighting kernel should I use? Right, so that is kind of a way to try and make sure that you pick a large enough neighborhood, right, to really represent the behavior of the full model, but also make it so that your G kind of remains most faithful, closest to your point, in case you're really unfortunate about, you know, the functional form or the full model F. So the question that you're asking then is, which kernel should I use? And my hunch is that there is no universal answer, so I'm just going to go with Gaussian kernel. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. I see there's another hand.
Thank you for a very interesting talk, actually. It is very inspiring. I just have a question about how do you draw the line between statistical prediction and an explainable AI model, especially about your last slide, where you have a tree, which goes just down, down, down there. If your tree has a depth about 100 of rules, is it still explainable or not for you?
Okay, so the word I think you mean is interpretable, right? Can I stare
yeah,
at it and get it?
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that is why I probably rushed through this slide a bit, because I realized that, you know, no air condition and it's your tea break. That is why I think that this terminology here is useful, because if your tree has a depth of 100, then your brain or my brain or anybody's brain isn't going to be able to understand the whole tree all at once. Your brain can't simulate the whole tree, right? So it's not kind of the most interpretable that it could be, which would be simulatable, transparent, or interpretable. Instead, it would be decomposable, transparent, right? You could zoom in on one part of the tree and go, okay, I understand this part, but now I need my full brain capacity to understand the other part, right? So you can't understand the whole thing in one go, but you understand pieces of it. So you can decompose it into understandable parts. Does that answer the question? Where do you draw the line? Like for me, 99, I'm joking. No, I don't think that there is, I don't think you can draw a line really, unfortunately. Depends on, you know, early in the morning, late in the evening, did you have coffee? Yeah. Should we let them go?
Yeah.